Maria Santos stood in the long line of people waiting to enter the television studio. Her hands shook a little as she held her old violin case. The case was brown and scratched from many years of use. She looked around at all the young people. Near her, most of them were teenagers or people in their 20s. They all looked confident and excited. Maria felt very different from them. She was 62 years old. Her hair was gray and pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a plain blue dress that she had bought at a discount store 3 years ago. It was her nicest dress, but it looked old-fashioned compared to what the other contestants were wearing. The young people around her had expensive clothes and shiny instruments. Some of them were talking loudly about their music schools and their teachers who were famous musicians. Maria listened to their conversations and felt more nervous. These young people had studied music their whole lives. They talked about competitions they had won and concerts they had played. Maria had not played her violin for other people in over 40 years. She wondered if she had made a big mistake by coming here. The line moved slowly toward the entrance of the studio. Maria could see bright lights and cameras inside. There were people with headphones and clipboards running around. Everything looked very professional and expensive. Maria had never been in a place like this before. She lived in a small town called Millbrook, where the biggest building was the grain elevator. A young woman in front of Maria turned around and smiled. "Hi, I'm Jessica," she said. "Is this your first time on a show like this?" Jessica had long blonde hair and carried a violin case that looked brand new. Her case had her name written on it in gold letters. "Yes," Maria said quietly. "I'm Maria. This is all very new to me." Jessica looked at Maria's violin case and noticed how old it was. "How long have you been playing?" she asked. "A long time," Maria answered. She did not want to explain her whole story to this young woman. It was too complicated and too sad. "That's cool," Jessica said. "I've been playing since I was 4. My parents spent thousands of dollars on lessons and instruments. I just graduated from the New York School of Music." "What school did you go to?" Maria felt her face get hot with embarrassment. "I didn't finish my music education," she said. This was not exactly a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. The line moved forward again. Maria could see the registration table where contestants had to check in. There were 3 people sitting behind the table with computers and lists of names. They all looked very young and wore black clothes with the show's logo on them. Maria remembered how she had gotten here. 3 weeks ago, her daughter Elena had called her with exciting news. Elena lived in the city, about 2 hours away from Millbrook. She worked as a nurse at a big hospital and had 2 children of her own. "Mom, you won't believe what I did," Elena had said on the phone. "I sent a video of you playing violin to a television show called Rising Stars. They want you to come for an audition." Maria had been shocked. "Elena, what video? When did you record me playing?" "I've been secretly recording you when you practice in the barn at night," Elena admitted. "Mom, you're so talented. People need to hear you play." "I sent them the video of you playing that beautiful song last month during the thunderstorm. Remember that night when you couldn't sleep?" Maria did remember that night. There had been a big storm and she couldn't sleep because of the thunder. She had gone to the barn with her violin, as she often did when she felt restless. She had played for over an hour, letting the music match the rhythm of the rain on the roof. She never knew Elena had been watching and recording from the barn door. "They really want me to audition?" Maria had asked. "Yes. They said your video was beautiful and moving. They want to meet you in person? The audition is in 3 weeks in the city. Please say you'll do it, Mom. This could be your chance." Maria had been quiet for a long time. She thought about all the reasons why she shouldn't go. She was too old. She was not good enough. She would embarrass herself. But then she thought about her violin sitting in the barn and how happy it made her feel when she played. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe this was her chance. Now, standing in this line with all these young musicians, Maria was not so sure. Everyone around her looked like they belonged here. She felt like an old woman who had wandered into the wrong place. The registration person called her name. Maria Santos? Yes, that's me, Maria said, walking up to the table. The young man looked at his computer screen. Age 62, from Millbrook. Instrument is violin. Is that correct? Yes, Maria said. The man looked at her with surprise. Most contestants were much younger. Okay, here's your number, he said, handing her a large white sticker with the number 847 on it. Put this on your shirt where the cameras can see it. You'll wait in the green room until they call your number. Maria took the sticker and found an empty chair in the corner of the green room. The room was full of people warming up their instruments. She could hear beautiful music coming from every direction. Violins, pianos, guitars, and voices all mixed together in a chaos of sound. Some people were doing vocal exercises. Others were practicing difficult pieces of music. Maria opened her violin case carefully. Inside was her old violin, the same one she had played when she was young. The wood was dark and smooth from years of being touched. The strings were new because Elena had surprised her with a fresh set last Christmas. But everything else about the violin was exactly the same as it had been 40 years ago. She picked up the violin and bowed, but did not start playing. She just held them and remembered. She remembered being 22 years old and full of dreams about becoming a professional musician. She remembered the feeling of performing on stage and hearing people applaud. She remembered how much she loved music and how she thought nothing could ever make her stop playing, but then life had happened. Her husband Roberto had been hurt in a farming accident. They had 3 small children and no money for medical bills. Maria had to work 2 jobs to support the family. There was no time for music lessons or practice or dreams. The violin had gone into the closet, and Maria had become a wife, mother, and worker instead of a musician. Now, 40 years later, she was holding her violin again in a room full of young people who still had their dreams. She wondered if it was too late for her to have dreams again too. A voice came over the speaker system. Attention, contestants. We will begin auditions in 15 minutes. Please be ready when your number is called. Maria's hands started shaking again. In a few hours, she would stand in front of 3 famous judges and try to prove that she belonged here. She closed her eyes and tried to remember why she had come. It was not just for Elena, though she loved her daughter for believing in her. It was not just for the television show or the chance to be famous. It was for the music itself, and for the young woman she used to be who had never gotten to say goodbye properly to her dreams. Before the audition began, the television crew wanted to film Maria telling her story. They set up cameras in a small room with 2 comfortable chairs. A young woman named Sarah sat across from Maria with a list of questions. Sarah had kind eyes and spoke in a gentle voice that helped Maria feel less nervous. Tell us about your early life with music, Sarah said. When did you first start playing violin? Maria smiled as she remembered. I was 7 years old when I first saw a violin. My family was very poor, but my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in the next town over. One day, she took me with her to work. The family had a daughter who was learning violin, and I heard her practicing. Maria paused and looked down at her hands. The sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I stood outside the music room door for an hour, just listening. When the girl finished, she saw me there and asked if I wanted to try holding her violin. The memory was so clear in Maria's mind. She had been wearing her only good dress, which was actually a hand-me-down from her older sister. The violin had felt magical in her small hands, even though she didn't know how to hold it properly. The girl's mother saw how much I loved the violin, Maria continued. She talked to my mother and offered to give me lessons in exchange for extra cleaning work. So my mother worked longer hours and I got to learn music? Sarah nodded encouragingly. How did your family feel about your music? My parents didn't understand it at first, Maria said. We were farmers. Music seemed like something for rich people, not for families like ours. But when they heard me play, they saw how happy it made me. My father built me a small practice room in our barn. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a chair, but it was my special place. Maria remembered those early years with joy. Every day, After school, she would run to the barn to practice. Her fingers were often stiff from helping with farm work, but when she picked up the violin, everything else disappeared. She practiced for hours, learning simple songs at first, then more difficult pieces. I got better very quickly, Maria said. My teacher was surprised by how fast I learned. She said I had natural talent, but I think it was just love. I loved music more than anything else in the world. Sarah asked about Maria's teenage years. This part of the story was harder for Maria to tell, but also more exciting. When I was 16, my teacher told me about a music school in the city, Maria said. She thought I was good enough to audition. My parents didn't have money for music school, but my teacher helped me apply for scholarships. Maria remembered the day she auditioned for the conservatory. She had never been in such a beautiful building. The walls were covered with pictures of famous musicians. The practice rooms had grand pianos and perfect acoustics. Everything about the place felt magical. I was accepted with a full scholarship, Maria said, and her voice filled with pride even 40 years later. My parents cried when I told them. They were proud but also scared. I was the first person in our family to go to college. The conservatory years were the happiest of Maria's young life. She studied with professors who had played in famous orchestras. She learned music theory and composition. She practiced 6 hours every day and loved every minute of it. Her teachers told her she had the talent to become a professional musician. I was planning to audition for orchestras after graduation, Maria told Sarah. My favorite teacher thought I could get a position with a regional symphony. It wasn't the biggest dream, but it was my dream. I was going to make a living playing music. But during her final year at the conservatory, Maria met Roberto Santos. He was studying agriculture at a nearby university. They met at a coffee shop, where Maria sometimes played violin for tips. Roberto would sit and listen to her play for hours. He said her music made him feel peaceful after long days of studying. Roberto was different from the other boys I knew, Maria said. He was kind and hardworking. He understood why music was important to me, even though he didn't know anything about it himself. We fell in love very quickly. They got married right after graduation. Roberto got a job managing a farm near his hometown of Millbrook. Maria moved there with him, planning to audition for orchestras in nearby cities. But Millbrook was far from any major city, and travel was expensive. I kept practicing and sending audition tapes to orchestras, Maria said. But it was hard. Roberto worked long hours, and I was alone in a town where I didn't know anyone. There weren't many opportunities for musicians. Then Maria got pregnant with their first child, Elena. She was happy about the baby, but pregnancy made her tired and sick. She couldn't practice as much as before. The audition tapes she sent out started getting rejected. After Elena was born, everything changed, Maria said, and Sarah could hear the sadness in her voice. Babies need constant attention. I couldn't practice for 6 hours a day anymore. Roberto was working hard to support us, but money was tight. I started giving piano lessons to children in town to help with expenses. Teaching piano was not the same as playing violin in an orchestra, but Maria tried to make the best of it. She enjoyed working with children and sharing her love of music with them. But late at night, when the baby was finally asleep, she would sometimes take out her violin and play very quietly. Then Roberto had his accident. He was working on a piece of farm equipment when it malfunctioned and crushed his leg badly. He needed several surgeries and months of recovery. He couldn't work for almost a year. That's when I had to make the hardest decision of my life, Maria told Sarah. Roberto's medical bills were enormous. We had a baby and no income. I had to find a way to support our family. Maria got a job at the local diner, working long hours for low pay. She also cleaned houses and took care of elderly people in town. Roberto felt terrible that his wife had to work so hard, but there was no choice. They had 2 more children over the next few years, and money was always tight. I tried to keep playing violin, Maria said, but there were only so many hours in the day. I was working 2 jobs and taking care of 3 children. Roberto was doing better, but farm work didn't pay very well. Music started to feel like a luxury we couldn't afford. Slowly, the violin stayed in its case for longer and longer periods. Maria would sometimes take it out and play for a few minutes while the children napped, but there was no time for serious practice. Her fingers started to feel stiff. She forgot some of the difficult pieces she used to know. One day I realized, I hadn't played in over a month, Maria said. That scared me. Music had always been the most important thing in my life, and I was losing it. But losing it felt necessary. Her children needed food and clothes and school supplies. Roberto was working as hard as he could, but they were barely making ends meet. Maria's music dreams felt selfish compared to her family's needs. I put the violin away in the bedroom closet, Maria said quietly. I told myself it was just temporary until the children got older and things got easier financially. I thought I would go back to it someday. Years passed, the children grew up. Money was still tight, but not desperate anymore. Roberto's leg healed, though it always hurt him when the weather changed. Maria kept working at the diner because they needed her income. The violin stayed in the closet, gathering dust. 20 years went by before I took it out again, Maria said. By then, I was afraid I had forgotten how to play. My fingers had gotten soft from washing dishes and cleaning. I thought maybe it was too late. But one night, when Roberto and the children were asleep, Maria had taken the violin to the barn. Her father's old practice room was still there, though it was full of farming supplies now. She cleared a small space and tried to play a simple song she used to know. It was terrible at first, Maria admitted. My fingers didn't remember where to go. The bow felt heavy and awkward. But after a few minutes, something started to come. Back, it was like riding a bicycle. My body remembered, even though my mind had forgotten. That night in the barn became a habit. Whenever Maria couldn't sleep, or when she felt sad about her lost dreams, she would take her violin to the barn and play. She taught herself the pieces she had forgotten. She even learned new songs by listening to the radio and figuring out the melodies. Nobody knew I was doing this, Maria told Sarah. It was my secret. I was embarrassed that I had given up my dreams, and I didn't want my family to feel bad about it. Roberto would have felt guilty if he knew I was still thinking about music. Sarah smiled warmly. But your daughter found out. Yes, Maria said, laughing a little. Elena always was too curious for her own good. She must have followed me to the barn one night and seen me playing. I never knew she was watching and recording until she called me about this audition. The interview was almost over, but Sarah had one more question. Do you ever regret the choices you made? Giving up music. For your family? Maria thought carefully before answering. I don't regret loving my family and taking care of them. Roberto and I raised 3 wonderful children who are all successful and happy. We built a good life together, but I do regret letting music disappear completely from my life for so many years. I should have found a way to keep playing, even if it was just for myself. She paused and looked directly at the camera. I think a lot of people, especially women, give up their dreams when life gets hard. Elena Santos Rodriguez had always been curious about her mother's nighttime habits. Ever since she was a teenager, she noticed that Maria would sometimes disappear from the house late at night. Roberto would be snoring softly in their bedroom, and her younger brothers would be fast asleep. But Elena would hear the back door close quietly around 11 or 12 o'clock. At first, Elena thought her mother might be having trouble sleeping, and was just walking around the yard. Many people in Millbrook did this when they felt restless. The town was safe, and the night air was often cooler and more comfortable than the stuffy farmhouse. But Elena noticed that her mother always went in the same direction toward the old barn behind their house. One night when Elena was 17, her curiosity got the better of her. She waited until she heard the back door close, then quietly followed her mother outside. The moon was bright enough to see clearly, and she watched Maria walk across the yard carrying something in her hands. Elena stayed far behind, hiding behind trees and farm equipment so her mother wouldn't see her. When Maria disappeared into the barn, Elena crept closer. The barn was old and had many gaps between the wooden boards. Elena found a spot where she could peek inside without being noticed. What she saw took her breath away. Her mother was sitting in the corner of the barn on an old wooden chair. She had a violin in her hands and was tuning it carefully. Elena had never seen this violin before. She didn't even know her mother could play any instrument. In their house, music came from the radio or television, not from live instruments. Then Maria began to play, and Elena felt like she was hearing something magical. The music was beautiful and sad at the same time. It filled the entire barn with sound that seemed to match the rhythm of the wind outside. Elena had never heard anything so lovely in her entire life. She stood there for over an hour, watching her mother play song after song. Some of the music sounded classical and complicated. Other songs were simpler and reminded Elena of folk music she had heard on the radio. But everything her mother played had a special quality that made Elena want to cry and smile at the same time. When Maria finally finished playing and started to pack up her violin, Elena quickly ran back to the house. She got into bed and pretended to be asleep when her mother came inside, but she couldn't actually fall asleep for hours. Her mind was full of questions. Where had her mother learned to play like that? Why was it a secret? Why did she only play in the barn at night? Elena never told anyone what she had seen that night. Something about the scene felt very private and personal. Her mother had looked so peaceful and happy while playing in a way Elena rarely saw during the day. She didn't want to disturb that happiness by asking questions or making her mother feel embarrassed over the next few years. Elena would sometimes follow her mother to the barn. She learned that Maria didn't go there every night, but only when something was bothering her or when she couldn't sleep. Elena started to understand that music was her mother's way of dealing with stress and sadness. After Elena moved away from home to study nursing, she missed those secret concerts. During visits back to Millbrook, she would sometimes see the light on in the barn late at night and know her mother was there playing. But Elena was older now and felt awkward about spying on her mother like a child. When Elena got married and had children of her own, she understood better why her mother's music was a secret. Being a wife and mother was a full-time job that left little time for personal interests. Elena loved her family, but she sometimes felt like she was losing herself in the constant work of taking care of other people. She imagined that her mother felt the same way and that music was the one thing that belonged only to her. Elena's opportunity to record her mother came by accident. She was visiting her parents with her 2 young children during a thunderstorm. Last spring, the power had gone out, and everyone was feeling restless and worried about the storm. Elena's children were scared of the thunder and couldn't fall asleep around midnight. Elena heard the familiar sound of the back door closing. Even during a storm, her mother was going to the barn to play music. Elena had an idea. She thought the sound of violin music might help her children relax and fall asleep. She decided to follow her mother and ask if she could bring the children to listen. Elena had her phone with her because she was using its flashlight to move around the dark house. As she walked toward the barn, she opened the camera app to use the light feature. When she got close to the barn and heard the beautiful music starting, she almost forgot her original plan. Her mother was playing something Elena had never heard before. It was a complex and emotional piece that seemed to match the storm outside. The violin sang high notes during the loud thunder and played gentle, flowing melodies during the quiet moments between lightning flashes. It was like Maria was having a conversation with the storm through her music. Elena realized she was already recording without meaning to. Her phone was still in camera mode, and the record button was easy to hit by accident in the dark. Once she realized what was happening, she decided to keep recording. This music was too beautiful to lose. She wanted to capture it so she could listen again later. She recorded for about 15 minutes before her phone's battery got low. The piece her mother was playing seemed to be coming to a natural end anyway. Elena quickly returned to the house. Before Maria finished and came back inside the next morning, Elena listened to the recording on her phone. Even through the small speakers and with the background noise of rain and thunder, her mother's music sounded incredible. Elena felt proud and also sad. Her mother was so talented, but almost nobody knew about it. It seemed unfair that such beautiful music was hidden away in an old barn. Elena started thinking about the recording over the next few days. She watched it several times and was amazed by how professional her mother sounded. Elena didn't know much about classical music, but she could tell that her mother was truly skilled. This wasn't just someone playing a hobby instrument. This was real musical talent. Elena began researching music competitions and talent shows online. She thought maybe there was some way for her mother to share her gift with more people. Most of the competitions she found were for young musicians or professionals, but one show caught her attention. Rising Stars was a television talent competition that featured musicians of all ages and backgrounds. Elena read that the show was specifically looking for people with interesting stories and unusual journeys in music. The application asked for a video audition that could be recorded anywhere, not necessarily in a professional studio. Elena watched her Storm recording again and realized it could work perfectly as an audition video. The setting was dramatic. Her mother's playing was beautiful, and the whole scene told a story. You could see the old barn, hear the storm, and feel the emotion in the music. It was much more interesting than a typical audition video recorded in someone's living room, but Elena knew she couldn't submit the video without her mother's permission. She also knew that her mother would probably say no if Elena asked directly. Maria was shy about her music and would be embarrassed to have strangers judge her playing. Elena decided to submit the application first and see what happened. If the show wasn't interested, then no harm was done. If they were interested, then Elena would have something concrete to show her mother. It would be easier to convince Maria to audition if she knew that professionals had already seen her playing and wanted to meet her. Elena filled out the application with basic information about her mother. She wrote a short explanation about Maria's background and why she only played music in secret. She tried to make it clear that her mother was not looking for fame or money, but that she had real talent that deserved to be heard. When Elena hit the submit button, she felt nervous and excited at the same time. She had no idea if anything would come of it, but at least she was trying to do something positive for her mother. Maria had spent 40 years taking care of other people. Maybe it was time for someone to do something special for her. 3 weeks later, Elena's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the woman on the other end introduced herself as a producer from Rising Stars. Elena's heart started beating fast. "We received your mother's audition video," the producer said. "It was really quite remarkable. The quality of her playing is impressive, and the story you told about her background is very moving. We would like to invite Maria for a live audition." Elena was so excited she could barely speak. "Really? You want her to come to the show?" "Yes, we think she would be a wonderful addition to this season's contestants. The audition would be in 3 weeks in the city. Would she be available?" Elena realized she had created a problem for herself. Her mother didn't even know about the video submission. Now Elena had to convince Maria to participate in something she had never agreed to in the first place. "Can I call you back tomorrow?" Elena asked. "I need to talk to my mother about this first." After Elena hung up, she looked at the recording on her phone again. Her mother's music really was beautiful enough for television. Elena just hoped that Maria would be brave enough to share it with the world. The audition studio was much larger than Maria had expected. She stood in the wings, waiting for her turn, and watched other contestants perform on the big stage. The lights were so bright that she couldn't see the audience, but she could hear people clapping and cheering for each performer. Everything felt overwhelming and exciting at the same time. A young man with a headset and clipboard approached Maria. His name tag said, "Kevin, production assistant." He had been very kind to all the contestants, making sure they felt comfortable and knew what to expect. "Miss Santos, you're next," Kevin said with a friendly smile. "Are you ready?" Maria nodded, though she didn't feel ready at all. Her hands were shaking slightly and her mouth felt dry. She had been waiting for over 2 hours, and the nervousness had been building the entire time. "Remember what we talked about during rehearsal," Kevin said. "Walk to the center of the stage, introduce yourself to the judges, and then wait for them to tell you what they want you to play? Take your time and try to enjoy it. The judges are really nice people. Maria had met the three judges briefly during the morning rehearsal, but she was still intimidated by them. Patricia Williams was a world-famous violinist who had played with orchestras in New York and London. Marcus Chun was a composer and conductor who had written music for movies and television shows. Dr. Sarah Johnson was a music professor who had taught at the best music schools in the country. These people had spent their entire lives in professional music. They had heard the best musicians in the world perform. Maria wondered what they would think of a farm woman from a small town who had learned to play violin in a barn. "Miss Santos," Kevin said gently, "it's time." Maria walked onto the stage carrying her violin case. The lights were even brighter than they had looked from the wings. She could feel the heat from them on her face. The judges sat at a long table in front of the stage with cameras positioned all around them. Maria could see several cameramen moving quietly to get different angles. She walked to the center of the stage where there was a small mark on the floor. This was where all the contestants were supposed to stand for their introductions. Maria set down her violin case and looked at the three judges. They all seemed very serious and professional. "Good afternoon," said Patricia Williams. She had short gray hair and wore an elegant black dress. Her voice was clear and confident. "Please tell us your name and where you're from." "My name is Maria Santos," Maria said. Her voice sounded smaller than usual in the big space. "I'm from Millbrook. It's a small farming town about 2 hours from here." "And how old are you, Maria?" asked Marcus Chun. He was a thin man with glasses and a beard. His manner was gentle but formal. "I'm 62 years old," Maria said. She heard a few surprised murmurs from the production crew. Most contestants were much younger. Dr. Johnson leaned forward with interest. She was a black woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. 62 is wonderful," she said warmly. "Music has no age limit. How long have you been playing violin?" "I started when I was 7, Maria said. "But I haven't played professionally or performed for other people in many years." The judges exchanged glances. They were clearly curious about Maria's story, but the audition format didn't allow time for long conversations. Patricia Williams looked at her notes and then back at Maria. "Maria, we're going to ask you to play something specific for us today," Patricia said. "We want to hear how you handle a simple, traditional piece before we move on to more complex music." "Are you familiar with the folk song Down in the Valley?" Maria nodded. It was a song that many beginning violin students learned. The melody was simple and easy to follow. Most professional musicians would consider it too basic to demonstrate their skills. "We'd like you to play Down in the Valley for us," Marcus Chun said. "Just the basic melody, nothing fancy. We want to assess your fundamental technique and tone quality." Maria understood what was happening. The judges were giving her an easy piece to see if she could handle the basics of violin playing. If she played it well, they might ask her to play something more difficult. If she played it poorly, the audition would probably end quickly. She opened her violin case and took out her instrument. The familiar weight of it in her hands made her feel a little more confident. This was the same violin she had played for over 50 years. It felt like an old friend. As Maria tuned her violin, she thought about Down in the Valley. She had learned this song when she was 8 years old during her first year of lessons. She had played it hundreds of times over the years, both as a student and later when she taught it to her own piano students who sometimes wanted to learn violin basics. But Maria also knew that Down in the Valley could be much more than a simple beginner song. The melody was beautiful and could carry a lot of emotion if it was played with feeling and expression. She had heard classical musicians take simple folk songs and turn them into something profound and moving. "Take your time, Maria," Dr. Johnson said encouragingly. "Whenever you're ready." Maria positioned her violin under her chin and raised her bow. The studio became completely quiet. She could sense all the cameras focused on her, and she knew that the judges were watching every movement of her fingers and bow. For a moment, Maria felt frozen. This was so different from playing alone in the barn at night. There, she could play anything she wanted, make mistakes, or stop and start over. Here, she had one chance to prove that she belonged on this stage. Then Maria remembered why she was here. Elena had sent that video because she believed her mother had something special to offer. The judges had invited Maria because they heard something in her playing that interested them. This wasn't about proving she was good enough. This was about sharing the music that had lived in her heart for 60 years. Maria took a deep breath and began to play Down in the Valley. The first few notes were careful and precise. She wanted to show the judges that she had good technique and a clean tone. The basic melody was simple, just as they had requested. But as Maria continued playing, something began to change. She started to remember all the times she had played this song before. She thought about teaching it to her young students and watching their faces light up when they finally got the melody right. She remembered playing it for her own children when they were small and wanted a lullaby. She thought about all the nights in the barn when she had used this simple song as a warm-up before playing more complex pieces. Each memory added something to the music. The melody remained the same, but Maria began to add subtle variations in rhythm and dynamics. She played some notes louder and others softer. She made some phrases slower and more thoughtful. While others moved forward with gentle energy, the judges had asked for the basic melody, but Maria was giving them much more. She was telling the story of every time she had played this song over the past 50 years. She was sharing all the love and sadness and hope that had built up inside her during the decades when she thought her musical dreams were over. As the song continued, Maria began to add small ornamentations and variations. These weren't show-off techniques, but natural expressions of the emotion she felt in the music. Her bow moved with confidence and grace. Her fingers found notes with the precision that came from years of practice. Even if that practice had been done in secret, the studio remained completely silent except for the sound of Maria's violin. The judges sat motionless, listening intently. The cameramen stopped moving around and stood still so they wouldn't interfere with the recording of the music. Maria could feel that something special was happening. The nervousness that had been building for hours was melting away. She felt like herself again, like the young woman who had once dreamed of playing music for people who would appreciate it. This was what she had been born to do. When Maria played the final note of Down in the Valley, she held it for a long, beautiful moment before lifting her bow away from the strings. The silence that followed felt different from the silence before she had started playing. This silence was full of emotion and surprise. Patricia Williams was the first to speak. "Maria," she said slowly, "that was not what we expected." Maria felt her heart sink. Had she done something wrong? Had she been too fancy with a song they wanted to hear played simply? But then Patricia smiled. "That was much, much better than what we expected. You took a simple folk song and turned it into something beautiful and personal. Your technique is excellent, but more importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You have musicality." Marcus Chun nodded in agreement. "In 40 years of judging auditions, I've heard thousands of people play Down in the Valley. Most of them play it correctly, but without any soul. You played it like it was the most important song in the world." Dr. Johnson was looking at Maria with obvious admiration. "You have the rare ability to find the emotional heart of a piece of music and share it with your audience. That's what makes the difference between someone who can play notes correctly and someone who is truly a musician." Maria felt tears forming in her eyes. These three experts, people whose opinions mattered in the music world, were telling her that she was good enough, more than good enough. They were telling her that she was a real musician. After the judges finished their compliments about Down in the Valley, Patricia Williams leaned forward with renewed interest. She exchanged a meaningful look with her fellow judges before speaking again. "Maria, what you just played was beautiful, but we can tell you have much more to offer," Patricia said. "That piece you played was quite simple, and you made it sound extraordinary. We're curious to hear what you can do with something more challenging." Maria felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. She had hoped they would ask her to. play something else, but she hadn't expected such positive feedback on her first song, Marcus. Hyun opened a folder and pulled out several sheets of music. "We have some options here," he said. "There are pieces by Bach, Mozart, and Vivaldi. There are also some contemporary classical pieces and some traditional folk songs from different cultures. What would you feel most comfortable playing?" Maria looked at the sheets of music he was holding, but she realized she wouldn't need them. During her years of secret practice in the barn, she had memorized dozens of pieces. Some were songs she had learned as a young student at the conservatory. Others were pieces she had taught herself by listening to recordings on the radio and figuring out the notes by ear. "I don't need sheet music," Maria said quietly. "I know many pieces by memory. Would it be all right if I played something that means a lot to me personally?" Dr. Johnson smiled encouragingly. "That would be wonderful. Music is always better when it comes from the heart. What piece would you like to play?" Maria thought carefully. She wanted to choose something that would show her technical skills, but also demonstrate the emotional depth that judges seemed to appreciate. She considered several options before settling on a piece that had special meaning for her. "I'd like to play Bach's Air on the G string," Maria said. "It's a piece I learned when I was young, but I've played it many times over the years. It always helps me feel peaceful when I'm troubled." The judges looked impressed. Bach's Air on the G string was not an easy piece. It required excellent bow control and the ability to sustain long, flowing melodies. It was also a piece that many professional violinists included in their repertoires. "That's an ambitious choice," Patricia said. "Please go ahead whenever you're ready." Maria closed her eyes for a moment and thought about all the times she had played this piece in the barn. She remembered playing it the night after Roberto's accident when she was so scared about their future. She remembered playing it when each of her children graduated from high school and left home. She remembered playing it just last month when she was feeling lonely and wondering if her life had any meaning beyond taking care of other people. This piece had been her companion through many difficult times. It had absorbed all of her worries and fears and transformed them into something beautiful. Now she had the chance to share that transformation with other people. Maria raised her violin and positioned her bow. But before she started playing, something unexpected happened. She felt her posture change. Her shoulders relaxed and her spine straightened. Her grip on the violin became more confident and natural. Even her facial expression shifted from nervous uncertainty to calm focus. The judges noticed the transformation immediately. This was not the same hesitant farm woman who had walked onto the stage 15 minutes earlier. This was a musician preparing to give a performance. When Maria drew her bow across the strings to begin the opening notes of Bach's Air, the sound that emerged was rich and warm and completely professional. There was no trace of the nervousness or amateur quality that might be expected from someone who hadn't performed publicly in decades. The melody of Air on the G string is one of the most beautiful in all of classical music. It moves slowly and gracefully, with each note flowing into the next like water. But playing it well requires incredible skill. The violinist must control the bow with perfect precision to create smooth, connected phrases. The intonation must be exact because any notes that are slightly out of tune will be obvious in such a slow, exposed melody. Maria played the opening phrase flawlessly. Her bow moved in long, controlled strokes that produced a singing tone. Each note was perfectly in tune and blended seamlessly with the notes around it. The judges could tell immediately that they were listening to someone with serious musical training and natural talent, but technical perfection was only the beginning of what Maria brought to this performance. As she continued playing, she began to add her own interpretation to Bach's notes. She made some phrases slightly louder and others softer, creating a sense of conversation within the melody. She used subtle changes in bow speed to make certain notes more expressive. Most importantly, she played with a deep understanding of the emotional content of the music. Bach wrote Air on the G string as part of a larger orchestral suite, but Maria was playing a version arranged for solo violin. This meant she had to Create the impression of multiple musical voices using just one instrument. She accomplished this by emphasizing different aspects of the melody at different times, making it sound like a conversation between several musicians. As Maria played, she began to feel the same sense of peace and transcendence that the music had always given her in the barn. But this time, the feeling was stronger because she was sharing it with other people. She could sense that the judges were being moved by her performance. She could feel the attention of everyone in the studio focused completely on her music. The piece built to its emotional climax about halfway through. This section required Maria to play in a higher register while maintaining the same flowing lyrical quality. Many violinists struggle with this part because the higher notes can sound thin or scratchy if not played with perfect technique. Maria navigated this section with ease. Her years of practice had given her complete command of her instrument in all registers. But more than that, she played this section with such emotional conviction that the technical difficulties seemed to disappear. The high notes soared with beauty and intensity that made everyone listening hold their breath. Patricia Williams, who had heard this piece performed by some of the world's greatest violinists, found herself completely absorbed in Maria's interpretation. There was something about the way Maria played that was different from the polished perfection of professional musicians. Her performance had a quality of lived experience, of someone who had found deep meaning in this music over many years of personal struggle. Marcus Chun was thinking about the story Maria had told in her interview. He could hear 40 years of suppressed musical passion being released in this performance. The music seemed to contain all the joy and sorrow and hope that Maria had accumulated during her years away from the stage. Dr. Johnson was amazed by the maturity of Maria's musical understanding. Many young musicians could play the notes of this piece correctly, but they lacked the life experience to understand its deeper meaning. Maria's performance had the wisdom that could only come from someone who had lived through real challenges and found solace in music. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Maria began to feel a sense of completion that went beyond just finishing the song. She felt like she was completing a journey that had begun when she was 7 years old and first heard a violin being played. All the years of study, all the dreams, all the sacrifice, and all the secret practice sessions in the barn had led to this moment. The final phrase of Air on the G string is simple but deeply moving. The melody descends slowly to its conclusion, like the end of a prayer or meditation. Maria played these last notes with such tenderness and finality that several people in the studio felt tears coming to their eyes. When Maria played the last note and lowered her violin, the silence that followed was profound. Nobody moved or spoke for several seconds. The performance had created a sacred space that no one wanted to disturb with applause or conversation. Finally, Patricia Williams broke the silence. "Maria," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion, "that was not just a good audition. That was a concert-quality performance. You play with the skill and artistry of a professional musician." Marcus Chun was nodding in agreement. "I've been involved in music for over 30 years, he said. "I've heard thousands of auditions and hundreds of professional concerts. What you just played would be impressive coming from anyone, but knowing your story makes it even more remarkable." Dr. Johnson wiped away a tear before speaking. "You have preserved and developed your musical gifts despite incredibly difficult circumstances. That shows a level of dedication and love for music that is truly inspiring. You are a musician in the deepest sense of the word." Maria felt overwhelmed by their responses. She had come to this audition hoping simply to not embarrass herself. She never expected such praise from musicians of this caliber. But even more important than their approval was the feeling she had experienced while playing. For the first time in 40 years, she had felt like her complete, authentic self while sharing her music with others. The transformation was complete. Maria Santos was no longer just a farm woman who played violin as a secret hobby. She was a musician who happened to live on a farm. The difference was profound, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The judges were clearly impressed with Maria's performance of Bach's Air on the G string, But Patricia Williams had one more request that would surprise everyone in the studio. "Maria, what you've shown us so far has been technically excellent and very moving," Patricia said. "But I'm curious about something. In your interview, you mentioned that you've been playing alone in a barn for many years. When musicians practice in isolation like that, they sometimes develop very personal and creative approaches to music. Have you ever experimented with changing or adding to the pieces you play?" Maria looked confused. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." Marcus Chun leaned forward to explain. "Patricia is asking if you've ever improvised or created your own variations on the songs you know. Many musicians, when they play alone, start to add their own ideas to the original compositions. It's a very natural thing to do." Maria's face lit up with understanding. "Oh yes, I do that all the time. Sometimes when I'm playing a song I know well, I hear other melodies in my head that would go along with it. Or I think of ways to make it sound different depending on how I'm feeling that day." Dr. Johnson smiled with excitement. "That's exactly what we're talking about. Improvisation and creative interpretation are some of the most important skills a musician can have. Would you be willing to demonstrate that for us?" Maria felt a flutter of nervousness. Playing established pieces from memory was one thing, but creating music on the spot felt much more risky. What if she made mistakes or if her ideas weren't good enough? "What would you like me to do?" Maria asked cautiously. Patricia had an idea. "You played Down in the Valley beautifully for us earlier. That's a simple folk song that many musicians use as a foundation for improvisation. Would you be comfortable playing it again, but this time adding whatever musical ideas come to you?" "Naturally." Maria thought about this request. She had indeed played around with Down in the Valley many times in the barn. It was such a familiar melody that she had often used it as a starting point for musical experimentation. Sometimes she played it as a sad song, sometimes as a happy dance tune, sometimes as a complex classical piece. "I think I can do that," Maria said. "But I should warn you that I don't really know what will happen. When I start improvising, the music just goes where it wants to go." "That's exactly what we hope to hear," Marcus said encouragingly. "The best improvisations are the ones where the musician follows their instincts rather than trying to plan everything out." Maria raised her violin again, but this time her posture was different. She looked more relaxed and confident than she had during her previous performances. This was the kind of playing she did most often in the barn, where she felt free to experiment and take musical risks. She began with the basic melody of Down in the Valley, just as she had played it in her first audition piece. But this time, everyone could sense that she was just getting started. The simple folk tune was going to be the foundation for something much more complex and personal. After playing through the melody once in its traditional form, Maria began to add variations. She played the tune again, but this time she added extra notes between the main melody notes, creating a more flowing and ornate version. Her fingers moved with confidence and creativity, finding new musical paths that enhanced the original song without losing its essential character. On the third time through the melody, Maria shifted into a minor key, which gave the happy folk song a mysterious and melancholy feeling. She also changed the rhythm, making some notes longer and others shorter, so that the familiar tune started to sound like a completely different piece of music. The judges were amazed by Maria's musical instincts. Many trained musicians struggle with improvisation because they're afraid of making mistakes or playing something that doesn't sound correct. But Maria was approaching improvisation with the freedom and creativity of someone who had spent years playing just for the joy of making music. As Maria continued to develop her improvisation, she began to incorporate elements from other musical styles. She added some techniques from classical music, making the simple folk melody sound like something Bach or Mozart might have written. Then she shifted into a more contemporary style, using rhythms and harmonies that sounded almost like jazz. But the most remarkable thing about Maria's improvisation was not the technical variety she demonstrated. It was the emotional journey she created. Each variation told a different part of a story. The first variation sounded hopeful and optimistic. The minor key version expressed sadness and longing. A faster, more energetic section conveyed joy and celebration. Patricia Williams realized she was witnessing something special. Maria was not just playing notes on a violin. She was using music as a language to communicate complex emotions and ideas. This was the mark of a true artist, someone who understood that the ultimate purpose of music was to connect with other people on a deep emotional level. As Maria's improvisation continued, she began to weave in fragments of other songs she knew. A few bars of a classical piece appeared in the middle of the folk melody, a snippet of a hymn emerged and then disappeared. Even a bit of a popular song from the radio found its way into the musical tapestry she was creating. Marcus Chun was taking notes frantically, trying to keep track of all the different musical elements Maria was incorporating. He had studied composition and arranging for decades, but he was learning new things about musical creativity just by listening to this farm woman who had taught herself to improvise in a barn. The improvisation built to a climax that was both exciting and moving. Maria was playing with such intensity and passion that everyone in the studio could feel the emotional power of her music. She was completely absorbed in the creative process, lost in the joy of making something beautiful and original. Then, gradually, Maria began to bring the improvisation back to its starting point. She played variations that became simpler and more similar to the original folk melody. Finally, she concluded by playing Down in the Valley exactly as she had begun. But now the simple tune sounded different because of everything that had come before it. When Maria finished and lowered her violin, the silence in the studio was even more profound than it had been after her Bach performance. Everyone present had just witnessed something rare and special, a master musician creating art in real time. Dr. Johnson was the first to speak, and her voice was filled with awe. Maria, what you just did was extraordinary. You took a simple folk song and turned it into a 15-minute musical journey that explored every emotion and style imaginable. That level of musical creativity and intuition is incredibly rare. Patricia Williams was shaking her head in amazement. I've performed with orchestras all over the world, she said. I've heard some of the greatest musicians alive today. What you just played would be impressive coming from any of them. The fact that you developed these skills in isolation, just following your own musical instincts, makes it even more remarkable. Marcus Chen looked at his fellow judges with an expression that seemed to say, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Then he turned to Maria. In 30 years of judging auditions, I have never heard anything like what you just played. You have demonstrated not just technical skill and musical knowledge, but genuine artistic creativity. You're not just a good musician. You're an artist. Maria felt overwhelmed by their praise, but she also felt something else, a sense of completion and fulfillment that she hadn't experienced in over 40 years. She had spent decades believing that her musical dreams were over, that she had missed her chance to be a real musician. But standing on this stage, receiving recognition from these experts, she realized that her musical journey had never really ended. It had just taken a different path. The judges continued to discuss Maria's performance, but she was no longer listening carefully to their words. She was thinking about Roberto and Elena and her two sons. She was thinking about all the people in Millbrook who had no idea that one of their neighbors was capable of creating such beautiful music. She was thinking about all the other people like herself who had put their dreams aside for practical reasons and might never know that it wasn't too late to reclaim them. Most of all, Maria was thinking about the young woman she had been at the conservatory, full of hope and ambition and love for music. That young woman was still inside her, and today, for the first time in 40 years, she had been allowed to fully express herself. The technical audition was over, but Maria's real journey as a musician was just beginning. The silence that followed Maria's improvisation seemed to stretch on forever. In the studio, time felt suspended as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. The cameraman had stopped moving entirely, afraid to disturb the profound quiet that had settled over the room. Even the production assistants, who had heard hundreds of auditions, stood motionless with expressions of wonder on their faces. Patricia Williams was the first judge to move. She slowly removed her glasses and wiped them with a tissue, though. Her eyes were what really needed attention. Tears had formed during Maria's performance, and she was struggling to maintain her professional composure. In her 40-year career as a professional violinist, Patricia had heard countless performances by the world's most celebrated musicians. But something about Maria's playing had touched her in a way she hadn't expected. "I need a moment," Patricia said quietly to her fellow judges. She stood up from the judges' table and walked a few steps away, her back to the stage. Marcus Chen and Dr. Johnson watched her with concern. They had never seen Patricia so emotionally affected by an audition. Marcus Chen, meanwhile, was staring at his notepad where he had been trying to document the various musical elements in Maria's improvisation. His page was covered with scattered words and phrases: Bach influences, jazz harmonies, folk tradition, original composition, masterful. But none of his notes seemed adequate to capture what had actually happened on stage. Dr. Johnson was looking directly at Maria with an expression of pure admiration. As a music educator, she had spent her career working with talented students and helping them develop their abilities. But Maria represented something different, a fully formed musical artist who had somehow emerged from complete obscurity. It challenged everything Dr. Johnson thought she knew about musical development and training. After what felt like several minutes, Patricia Williams returned to the judges' table. Her eyes were red, but her expression was determined. She looked directly at Maria and spoke in a voice that was steady but filled with emotion. "Maria, I need to tell you something," Patricia began. "I have been playing violin professionally for 4 decades. I have performed in concert halls around the world. I have played with the finest orchestras and alongside the most celebrated musicians of my generation. I thought I had heard everything that was possible on the violin." She paused and took a deep breath before continuing. "What you just played has changed my understanding of what music can be. Your technical skill is impressive, but that's not what moved me to tears. It was the depth of feeling and the artistic maturity in your playing. You have something that cannot be taught in any conservatory or learned from any method book. You have wisdom." Maria felt her own eyes filling with tears. She had hoped that the judges would find her playing acceptable, maybe even good. She had never imagined that a world-renowned musician like Patricia Williams would compare her favorably to professional artists. Marcus Chen leaned forward and spoke next. "Maria, I want you to understand something about what just happened here. When we ask contestants to improvise, we usually hear tentative attempts at creativity. Most people play a few variations and then run out of ideas. What you did was compose an entire piece of music in real time. You created something original and beautiful that had a clear structure and emotional arc." He gestured to his notes. "I was trying to analyze your improvisation as you played it, but I had to give up. You were incorporating so many different musical styles and techniques that I couldn't keep track. And you were doing it all naturally, without any apparent effort or planning. That kind of musical intuition is extraordinarily rare." Dr. Johnson had been waiting for her turn to speak, and now she addressed Maria with the passion of an educator who had discovered something remarkable. "Maria, in my 30 years of teaching music, I have worked with hundreds of talented students. Many of them had perfect technique and excellent musical training. But very few of them had what you demonstrated today, the ability to use music as a genuine form of expression and communication." She paused to organize her thoughts. What makes a great musician is not just the ability to play notes correctly, it's the ability to find the emotional truth in music and share it with other people. You have that ability in abundance. When you played today, you weren't just performing for us. You were telling us your story through music. We could hear 40 years of life experience in every note you played. The 3 judges exchanged glances, and Patricia Williams nodded to her colleagues. It was clear they had reached a unanimous decision about Maria's audition. "Maria," Patricia said, "we need to discuss what happens next. Normally, at the end of an audition like this, we would tell a contestant whether they've been accepted to continue in the competition. But your situation is unusual." Maria's heart began to beat faster. She wasn't sure if unusual was good or bad in this context. Marcus Chun explained further. The Rising Stars competition is designed for emerging musicians who want to launch professional careers. Most of our contestants are young people who hope that winning the show will help them get recording contracts or performance opportunities. Maria felt her hopes beginning to sink. Maybe she was too old for this competition after all. Maybe the judges thought she was talented but not appropriate for their show, but Dr. Johnson quickly clarified their meaning. What Marcus is trying to say is that you don't need this competition to validate your abilities as a musician. You're already performing at a professional level. The question is not whether you're good enough for Rising Stars. The question is whether Rising Stars is the right platform for sharing your remarkable gifts with the world. Patricia Williams took over the explanation. Maria, we want to offer you something that we've never offered to any contestant before. Yes, you are absolutely accepted to continue in the Rising Stars competition if that's what you want. But we also want to discuss other opportunities that might be more suitable for someone with your level of artistry. She looked at her fellow judges before continuing. I have connections with classical music venues and recording companies. Marcus knows people in the film and television industry who are always looking for exceptional musicians. Dr. Johnson has ties to music festivals and educational programs. We want to help you explore all the possibilities for sharing your music. Maria was stunned. She had come to this audition hoping simply to have the experience of performing for other people again. She never imagined that it might lead to real opportunities in the music world. But I'm 62 years old, Maria said. Isn't that too old to start a music career? The three judges looked at each other and began to smile. Patricia Williams answered for all of them. Maria, music has no age limit. Some of the most powerful and moving performances come from musicians who have lived long enough to understand the deeper meanings in the music they play. Your age is not a disadvantage, it's one of your greatest strengths as an artist. Marcus Chun nodded in agreement. The music industry is always looking for authenticity and originality. In a world full of young musicians who all sound similar, you offer something completely unique. Your story is compelling, your playing is exceptional, and your artistic vision is mature and fully developed. Dr. Johnson added, there are many precedents for musicians who found success later in life. What matters is not when you start your professional career, but the quality and sincerity of the music you create. You have both of those qualities in abundance. The conversation was interrupted by applause from the production crew. Everyone in the studio had been listening to the judges' comments, and they began clapping spontaneously. The applause grew louder and more enthusiastic, with people whistling and cheering for Maria. Through the applause, Patricia Williams called out one final comment. Maria Santos, you are not just a contestant who passed an audition. You are an artist who deserves to be heard by the world. We are honored to have witnessed your extraordinary talent, and we are committed to helping you share it with as many people as possible. As the applause continued, Maria looked out at all the faces in the studio. Every person there was smiling at her with genuine admiration and respect. These were people who worked in the music industry every day, who had heard thousands of musicians perform, and they were applauding for her, a farm woman from Millbrook who had learned to play violin in a barn. For the first time in 40 years, Maria Santos felt like a real musician again. But more than that, she felt like an artist whose work had touched other people's hearts. And that feeling was more valuable than any prize or recognition she could have imagined. The first sign that something extraordinary had happened came when Maria walked out of the television studio and turned on her phone. In the few hours she had been inside the building, her phone had filled with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, and social media alerts covered her screen. She had never seen anything like it. Elena was waiting for her in the parking lot, and she ran to her mother with tears in her eyes. Mom, your audition is already online. They posted a video of you playing on the show's website, and people are sharing it everywhere. You're famous. Maria didn't understand what Elena meant. She had never used social media and barely knew how the internet worked. The idea that her performance could be seen by people all over the world seemed impossible. "How many people have seen it?" Maria asked. Elena looked at her phone. "The video has been viewed 50,000 times in the last 2 hours, and it's growing fast. People are commenting about how beautiful your playing was. Look at this." Elena showed her mother some of the comments on the video. People from different countries were writing about how Maria's music had moved them to tears. Some said her story inspired them to pursue their own abandoned dreams. Others simply wanted to know where they could hear more of her playing. On the drive home to Millbrook, Elena read more comments aloud while Maria drove. A woman in Canada wrote that she was going to take piano lessons again after watching Maria play. A man in Australia said that Maria's improvisation was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. A teenager in Japan thanked Maria for showing that it's never too late to follow your dreams. "I don't understand," Maria said. "How come people in other countries already know about my audition?" Elena tried to explain how the internet worked, but Maria was still confused. The idea that her performance in one building could instantly reach people around the world was overwhelming. She had grown up in a time when news traveled slowly and fame was something that happened to movie stars and politicians, not to ordinary people. By the time they reached Millbrook, the video had been viewed over 100,000 times. Elena's phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters and music industry representatives. Maria felt like she was living in a dream or maybe a nightmare. She just wanted to go home and process what had happened at the audition, but even in Millbrook, Maria couldn't escape the attention her performance was generating. Roberto was waiting at their house with a confused expression on his face. "Maria, people have been calling here all day asking about you. Reporters want to interview you. Someone from a record company wants to talk to you." "What happened at that audition?" Maria sat down at her kitchen table and tried to explain the day's events to Roberto. She told him about the judges' reactions and their offer to help her find performance opportunities. She tried to describe the feeling of playing music for other people again after 40 years of secrecy. Roberto listened with amazement and pride. He had always known his wife was talented, but he had never imagined that her music could attract attention from the professional music world. He felt guilty that Maria had hidden her playing from him for so many years, and he wondered if he could have done something to encourage her musical interests. "Why didn't you tell me you were still playing?" Roberto asked. "I would have supported you if I had known music was still important to you." Maria took his hand. "I didn't want you to feel bad about what happened after your accident. We both made sacrifices for our family, and I don't regret that. But maybe I should have found a way to keep music in my life more openly." Over the next few days, the attention around Maria's audition continued to grow. The video reached 1 million views within a week. News programs wanted to interview her. Music magazines wrote articles about her story. The mayor of Millbrook declared a Maria Santos Day to celebrate their town's newest celebrity. But the most meaningful responses came from individual people who wrote to Maria about how her story had affected them. A 70-year-old man in Texas decided to take up painting again after watching her performance. A mother in Ohio started teaching her children about following their dreams no matter what obstacles they faced. A retired teacher in England began writing the novel she had always planned to write. Someday. Maria received hundreds of letters from people who had given up their own creative pursuits for practical reasons. Many of them were women who had sacrificed their personal ambitions to care for their families. They saw Maria as proof that it was possible to reclaim those abandoned parts of themselves. Even later in life, the Rising Stars producers offered Maria a guaranteed spot in the final competition. But she decided not to continue with the show. The judges had been right when they said that Maria didn't need the competition to validate her abilities. More importantly, Maria realized that her real purpose was not to win contests but to inspire other people through her music and her story. Instead, Maria accepted Patricia Williams' offer to help her connect with classical music venues. Within a month of her audition, Maria had bookings for performances at small concert halls and music festivals in several states. She also signed a recording contract to make an album of the pieces she had been playing in secret for 40 years. Maria's first professional concert took place at a music festival in a nearby city. The venue held 300 people, and every seat was sold. The audience included many people who had seen her audition video online and wanted to hear her play in person. When Maria walked onto the stage that night, she felt the same transformation she had experienced during her television audition. She was no longer a nervous farm woman pretending to be a musician. She was an artist sharing her gifts with people who had come specifically to hear her play. The concert program included the Batch piece she had played for the judges, her improvisation on Down in the Valley, and several other pieces that had special meaning for her. But the most powerful moment came when Maria spoke directly to the audience about her 40-year journey away from and back to music. I want to tell everyone here, especially the older people in the audience, that it is never too late to return to the things that make you feel most like yourself, Maria said. I thought my musical dreams were over when I was 22 years old, but dreams don't die. They just wait for the right moment to come back to life. The standing ovation that followed lasted for over 5 minutes. Many people in the audience were crying, including Roberto and Elena, who had driven to the concert to support Maria's return to professional music. After the concert, dozens of audience members waited to speak with Maria personally. They thanked her for her music, but more often they thanked her for her example. Many of them made commitments that night to pursue their own postponed dreams. 6 months after her audition, Maria had performed in 12 different cities and recorded her first album. Music critics praised both her technical skills and her emotional depth. Several universities invited her to speak about music education and the importance of lifelong learning, but perhaps the most significant change in Maria's life was not professional but personal. Her story had inspired a movement of people who called themselves late bloomers, individuals who were pursuing creative dreams after the age of 50. Maria received letters from painters, writers, dancers, and musicians who had started or restarted their artistic journeys because of her example. A documentary filmmaker approached Maria about making a movie about her life and the broader phenomenon of older adults pursuing delayed dreams. The film, titled Never Too Late, featured Maria's story alongside interviews with dozens of other people who had found the courage to reclaim their creative selves in later life. Roberto became Maria's biggest supporter and proudest fan. He attended every local performance and helped manage her growing schedule of concerts and interviews. He often told reporters that watching his wife's transformation had taught him that he never really knew all the depths of the person he had been married to for 40 years. Maria was always a wonderful wife and mother, Roberto would say. But seeing her on stage, sharing her music with the world, I realized there was a whole other part of her that had been waiting to emerge. I'm grateful that I get to see this side of her now. Elena quit her job at the hospital to become Maria's manager and booking agent. She had discovered that she had inherited some of her mother's artistic instincts, but her talents lay in organizing and promoting rather than performing. Working together allowed both women to use their abilities in service of something they both believed in. Maria's 2 sons, who had never known about their mother's musical background, were amazed by her sudden fame. They traveled from their homes in other states to attend her concerts and found themselves seeing their mother in a completely new light. The quiet woman who had made their lunches and helped with homework was the same person receiving standing ovations from sophisticated audiences. The barn where Maria had practiced in secret for so many years became a place of pilgrimage for her fans. People would drive to Millbrook just to see where she had kept her musical dreams alive during the decades when no one else knew about them. Maria eventually had to put up a small sign asking visitors to respect the family's privacy.